A rookie nurse is shamed by a top surgeon for a mistake she never made. A VIP patient arrives, a man bleeding out from wounds no one in the ER can understand. She makes a call no one knows exists, and the Department of Defense descends, clearing the entire hospital just for her. Now let me take you inside the emergency room of Metropolitan General, where competence is about to have its day. The air in the Metropolitan General ER was a thick soup of controlled panic and disinfectant. It had a smell, a texture, a weight all its own. Bleach fought a losing battle against the metallic tang of blood, the sour scent of sickness, and the ever-present aroma of burnt, stale coffee. The symphony of the place was a cacophony of beeping monitors, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, and the clipped, strained voices of people trying to hold back the tide of human misery. Ilara Vance, Eli to the few who bothered to ask, moved through the chaos like a ghost. She was new, 6 weeks in, and the rookie label was practically tattooed on her forehead. She wore her plain blue scrubs like a uniform, which they were, but for her, it felt more like camouflage. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, not a single strand daring to escape. She had the kind of face that was easy to overlook, pleasant but not memorable, with pale blue eyes that saw everything and gave away nothing. She was a phantom of efficiency. While other nurses scrambled, their movements jerky with adrenaline, Eli's were economical, precise. A hand here to steady a trembling patient, a quiet word there to de-escalate a family's fear, her fingers dancing over an IV pump to silence an alarm before it could fully register in the surrounding din. She didn't hurry. She simply moved at the correct speed, a concept lost on most of the floor. Her colleagues mistook her quiet for timidity, her precision for slowness. They saw a girl, maybe mid-20s, who seemed perpetually overwhelmed and on the verge of tears. They were wrong on all counts. The stillness was control. The precision was a religion learned in a place far hotter and dustier than this sterile, air-conditioned box. And her eyes weren't holding back tears. They were processing threat assessments, cataloging injuries, and prioritizing actions with a cold, detached clarity that would have terrified them if they'd understood it. Vance, the voice of the charge nurse, Brenda, cut through the noise. Bed 6 needs a new bag of saline, and Dr. Finch is on his way in for rounds. Try not to look like a lost puppy when he gets here. Eli simply nodded, her expression unchanging. She retrieved the saline, her movements fluid. The patient in bed 6, an elderly man with pneumonia, gave her a weak, grateful smile. She checked his vitals, adjusted his pillow, and made a small note on his chart about the slight wheezing in his lower left lung that wasn't there an hour ago. A detail she knew the day shift doctor would miss. Then the doors to the ambulance bay slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and the atmosphere shifted. It was as if a king had just entered his court. Dr. Alistair Finch strode into the ER, and the ambient chaos seemed to organize itself around him. He was a man carved from ambition and tailored suits, though today he wore immaculate, custom-fitted gray scrubs that probably cost more than Eli's car. His silver hair was perfect. His smile was perfect. He radiated an aura of untouchable authority and God-given talent. The nurses fluttered, the residents straightened their spines, and a hush fell over the central station. He smiled like a man of God, but his eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, held the cold calculation of a banker. They swept the room, not seeing patients, but problems to be solved, successes to be claimed. "Brenda, report," he said, his voice as smooth as expensive whiskey. He didn't look at her, his attention already on a large monitor displaying patient vitals. Brenda rattled off the morning's catastrophes with practiced efficiency. Finch listened, nodding, occasionally interjecting with a curt order. He was brilliant, no one denied it. He could diagnose a rare condition from across the room and perform surgical miracles that other doctors wouldn't even attempt. He was the hospital's star, its rainmaker, and he knew it. This knowledge had long ago curdled from confidence into a deep, unshakable arrogance. His gaze eventually landed on Eli, who was quietly documenting her note on the patient in bed 6. He paused, his perfect smile tightened by a millimeter. "And the new one?" he asked Brenda, his voice just loud enough for half the ER to hear. "Is she still managing to put the IVs in the right end of the patient?" A few nervous titters rippled through the nearby staff. Brenda gave a tight, apologetic smile. "She's learning, doctor. Just a bit green." Eli didn't look up. She finished her note, clicked the pen, and placed it back in her pocket. She could feel his eyes on her, a physical weight. He enjoyed this, the small, casual cruelties that reaffirmed his dominance. She had known men like him before. They were always the most dangerous, not because of their skill, but because their ego was a liability that got other people killed. Finch walked over to her, his expensive running shoes making no sound on the floor. He picked up the chart she had just put down. He scanned it, his eyes narrowing. "Bed 6, he mused. "Mr. Henderson, 82 years old, community-acquired pneumonia, straightforward. We're managing him with antibiotics and hydration." He then tapped the note she had made. "And you've documented a new wheeze?" "Yes, doctor," Eli said, her voice flat, neutral. "On the lower left lobe. It's faint. I thought it was worth noting." Finch let out a soft, condescending chuckle. He turned to the small audience of residents and nurses that had subtly gathered. "Listen to this, everyone. Our new night school nurse fancies herself a diagnostician." Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at the edges of Eli's composure. She kept her face a mask of placid professionalism. She would not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Sweetheart," he said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more public than a shout. The scent of his cologne, something citrusy and expensive, was suffocating. "Your job is to hang bags and change bedpans. My job, the job of the actual doctors in the room, is to interpret things like breath sounds. Do you understand the difference?" He didn't wait for an answer. He took a black marker from his pocket and drew a thick, decisive line through her note on the chart. The black ink was a violation, a public negation of her observation, of her competence. "Don't clutter my charts with your amateur assessments," he said, his voice returning to its normal, authoritative volume. "It's sloppy. It creates confusion and wastes time." He tossed the chart onto the counter with a dismissive clatter. "Brenda, have a word with her. I don't have time to run a remedial nursing course." And with that, he turned and strode away, the sea of staff parting for him once more. The moment he was gone, the held breaths were released. A few of the junior nurses snickered. Others, the more seasoned ones, just gave Eli a look of pity and shook their heads before turning back to their work. Don't make waves. Don't get on Finch's bad side. It was the first rule of survival in the Met General ER. Eli stood perfectly still for a count of 3. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks and forced it back down. She was a professional. She had been insulted by far worse men than Dr. Alastair Finch. She had been shot at by men who were, at least, honest about their intentions. This was just noise, a political game in a world she was still trying to navigate. She looked at the chart, at the ugly black line striking out her careful words. It wasn't just an insult, it was a potential danger to the patient. If Mr. Henderson's condition worsened, if that wheeze was the first sign of a developing pleural effusion or a secondary infection, her warning was now gone. Finch hadn't just humiliated her, he had actively made a patient less safe to feed his own ego. A cold, professional fury, familiar and sharp, settled deep in her gut. It was an old friend, that feeling. It was the feeling that preceded action, the quiet hum before the storm. She picked up the chart, took a sterile wipe, and methodically cleaned the black marker off the laminated surface. She then took her pen and rewrote her note, word for word. She initialed it again. Brenda saw her. The charge nurse's eyes widened in a silent, horrified, "What are you doing?" Eli met her gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement. The note stays. Brenda hesitated, then seemed to make a calculation. Arguing would cause a bigger scene. She turned away, pretending she hadn't seen. Eli was on her own. It was a familiar feeling. She was better on her own anyway. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine emergencies. A dislocated shoulder, a child with a high fever, a minor car accident. Eli worked, her movements still precise, her face still a blank mask. But inside, a switch had been flipped. The cage of her own paranoia, as she sometimes called it, the hypervigilance she had tried so hard to suppress since leaving the service, was beginning to re-engage. She saw the ER not as a place of healing, but as a compromised environment with a hostile actor in command. She cataloged the exits. She noted the placement of security guards. She clocked the sloppy, sterile techniques of a resident in a hurry. Her mind, trained for a different kind of battlefield, was adapting to this one. She was just finishing a suture removal when the world tilted on its axis. The dedicated trauma line rang, a shrill, insistent tone that cut through every other sound. Brenda snatched it up. "ER, Brenda speaking. Yes, how many? ETA 2 minutes? We'll be ready." She slammed the phone down. "Listen up," she yelled, her voice tight with real urgency now. "Incoming priority 1 trauma, single victim, multiple GSWs, helicopter transport, state police escort. That's all they said. Let's move, people. Trauma Bay 1, now!" The ER exploded into purposeful action. A team assembled, doctors, nurses, techs, a well-oiled machine ready for the worst. Dr. Finch, hearing the call, reappeared, a predatory gleam in his eye. This was his stage. A high-profile trauma was where he shone. "I'll take the lead," he announced, pulling on a pair of gloves. "Someone get me a full trauma gown. Let's not be sloppy." Eli, by virtue of her junior status, was relegated to the periphery, a gopher, a runner for supplies. It suited her. It gave her the best vantage point. The bay doors flew open, and a gust of wind from the helicopter blades whipped through the ER. Paramedics burst in, wheeling a gurney at a dead run. On it was a man, or what was left of one. He was drenched in blood. His tactical-looking civilian clothes were shredded and dark with it. An oxygen mask was strapped to his face, but his breathing was shallow, ragged. Multiple field dressings, hastily applied, were already soaked through. "John Doe, approximately 40 years old," the lead paramedic shouted over the noise. Found in a vehicle downtown. At least 3 penetrating wounds to the chest and abdomen. Vitals are crashing. BP 60 over palp, pulse 140 and thready. We've pushed 4 units of O negative and 2 of plasma, but we're losing him. They transferred him to the trauma bed. The team swarmed him, a flurry of hands and voices. Cut the clothes off. Get me a chest tube tray. X-ray now. Page the OR. Tell them we're coming up. Finch was in his element, barking orders, a conductor of chaos. Eli stood near the supply cart, her eyes scanning the patient. She wasn't looking at the big, obvious wounds. She was looking at the details, the pattern of the blood spray, the entry points. Something was wrong. "I need a large bore IV in the other arm now," a resident yelled, fumbling with a vein that had already collapsed. "On it," Eli said, moving in. She took the catheter, her movements sure and steady. She found a deep brachial vein with her fingertips, a trick she'd learned in the dark, and slid the needle in perfectly on the first try. Blood flashed in the chamber. She secured the line and hung the bag of crystalloid solution they'd ordered. "Good," Finch grunted, not even looking at her. His focus was on the chest. "There's no breath sounds on the right side. It's a massive hemothorax. Get that chest tube in." The resident made the incision, inserted the tube. A gush of dark, venous blood filled the container, but the patient's numbers didn't improve. His blood pressure continued to drop. The monitor began to blare a high-pitched alarm. "He's in VTOSH," someone shouted. "Get the paddles!" They charged the defibrillator. "Clear!" Finch yelled. The man's body jumped on the table. The jagged rhythm on the monitor persisted for a moment, then devolved into a flat line. "He's coding!" "Start compressions!" A resident jumped onto a stool and began the rhythmic, brutal work of pumping the man's heart for him. Finch stared at the monitor, his face a mask of frustrated disbelief. All his skill, all his authority, and the man was dying in front of him. "Push one of epi," he commanded. Eli administered the drug. Nothing. The line on the monitor remained stubbornly, fatally straight. She looked at the patient again. The chest tube was draining blood. Yes, but not the arterial spray she'd expect from a major vessel tear in the lung. The entry wounds. They were small, precise, and there was a subtle, almost invisible bruising pattern high on the man's chest, near the clavicle. A periclavicular hematoma. Her blood ran cold. She knew what it was. She had seen it exactly twice before, in the mountains of Afghanistan. A subclavian artery, bleed, hidden behind the collarbone. The bullet or shrapnel had missed the lung, but clipped the massive artery underneath. The chest tube wasn't reaching the source of the bleeding. He was filling his chest cavity with blood from a place they couldn't see and couldn't reach. Compressions were useless. They were just pumping the remaining blood out of his circulatory system and into his chest. "Doctor," Eli said, her voice quiet but clear. Finch ignored her. "Another round of epi. Come on, people, don't let him go." "Dr. Finch," she said again, louder this time, stepping forward. "The compressions aren't working. It's not a cardiac issue." Finch finally turned to her, his face contorted with rage. "Nurse, if you say one more word, I will have you fired and thrown out of this hospital. Get back and stay out of the way." The other staff members stared at her, their expressions a mixture of fear and secondhand embarrassment. She was challenging the king in the middle of his most sacred ritual. But Eli wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the monitor, at the flat line, at the clock on the wall. They had seconds left before brain death became irreversible. Desperation. He was dying. Finch, in his arrogant blindness, was killing him. She could stand back, let it happen. Finch would take the fall. No one would ever blame the rookie nurse. Her career would be safe. Or she could act. If you were in Eli's shoes, would you let him die to protect yourself? Or would you risk everything you've worked for on the slim chance you could save a stranger? She looked at the man on the table, at the subtle, almost imperceptible tattoo peeking out from under his collar. It was a small, stylized wing and a star. Pararescue. He was one of hers. That decided it. She moved. She didn't think. She acted. "I'm not letting you die today," she muttered. A line she'd used before, half promise, half gallows humor. "It would look bad on my resume." She pushed through the stunned residents, grabbing a large-bore catheter and a 10-cubic-centimeter syringe from the cart as she went. "What in God's name are you doing?" Finch roared. "Security! Get her out of here!" Eli ignored him. Her world narrowed to the patient, to the small patch of bruised skin below his collarbone. Her movements were a blur of practiced, hyper-competent grace. She palpated the area, feeling for the landmarks only she knew: sternocleidomastoid muscle, clavicle, sternal notch. "It's a subclavian bleed," she said, not to anyone in particular, but to the universe. "He's bleeding out above the lung." She inserted the needle, angling it down, deep behind the bone. It was a blind stick, a 1-in-a-million procedure you don't learn in nursing school. You learn it on a battlefield when a thoracic surgeon is 100 miles and a day away. You learn it because it's the only option between life and death. She aspirated. The syringe filled instantly with bright red, arterial blood. "Got it," she whispered. She advanced the catheter, removed the needle, and attached a high-pressure infusion line. At the same time, with her other hand, she reached across the patient's chest and applied brutal, direct pressure to the artery, pressing it against the first rib to stanch the bleeding at its source. It was a hold that would dislocate a normal person's shoulder, a position of extreme leverage and strength. "Stop compressions," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority no one in the room had ever heard from her. Miraculously, the resident doing compressions, a young man with wide, terrified eyes, obeyed. "What did I tell you?" Finch bellowed, moving toward her, his face purple with fury. "Get me O-neg and plasma. Push it through this line as fast as it will go," Eli ordered, her eyes locked on the monitor. "And someone get a blood pressure." A nurse, mesmerized by the sheer certainty in Eli's voice, scrambled to comply. As the first bag of blood surged into the subclavian line, directly into the central circulation, the flat line on the monitor flickered. A beat. Another. A slow, weak sinus rhythm appeared. A collective gasp went through the room. "BP is 70/40. It's climbing, 80/50, someone yelled. Finch froze mid-step. He stared at the monitor, then at Eli, then back at the monitor. His expression, for the first time, was not arrogance or anger, but pure, unadulterated shock. It was impossible. She had done something impossible. Eli held the pressure point, her arm trembling from the strain, her knuckles white. She was the dam holding back the flood. "He's stabilized, but he won't last long. He needs a vascular surgeon and a full thoracotomy to repair the artery. We need to get him to the OR." As she spoke, her eyes fell on a small, rugged pouch still attached to the man's belt, missed by the paramedics. It wasn't standard civilian gear. It was military grade. She'd carried one just like it for years. While holding pressure with one arm, she used her free hand to rip open the Velcro flap. Inside, nestled in foam, was a small dark green satellite phone. An Iridium 9575A, modified for burst transmissions on encrypted military networks. She knew this phone. Finch was sputtering, trying to regain control. All right, people, let's get him prepped for transport to the OR. I'll scrub in." He was trying to reclaim the victory, to paper over the fact that she had just saved a man he had condemned to death. Eli ignored him. Her fingers flew over the keypad of the sat phone, her muscle memory perfect. She didn't need to look. Power on, antenna up, channel select. She found the emergency frequency, a channel reserved for the direst of circumstances. She pressed the transmit button. Her voice was low, speaking a language no one else in the room could understand. It was a string of letters and numbers, a code. "Nighthawk is down. I repeat, Nighthawk is down. Location Met General ER. Requesting Angel Flight Protocol for immediate evac. Authorization code, Sierra Tango November 7. She released the button. For a few seconds, there was only static. The ER was a tableau of stunned silence, the only sound the steady, strengthening beep of the heart monitor. Then a voice crackled back through the tiny speaker, distorted but clear, and radiating a power that seemed to press down on the entire room. "Repeat authorization." Eli took a breath. "Authorization Sierra Tango November 7. My identifier is Vance, Echo Lima, India." There was another pause, longer this time. The people in the room exchanged confused, fearful glances. What was happening? Who was she talking to? Then the voice came back, and this time the clipped, professional tone was gone, replaced by something that sounded like disbelief. "Vance? Master Sergeant Vance, is that you?" Eli closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. The sound of that voice, of her old rank, was like a key turning in a lock she'd forgotten existed. "Affirmative, General," she said, her own voice tight. "Nighthawk needs a real hospital." "Stand by, Eli," the voice on the phone said, the authority snapping back into place like a whip crack. "I'm taking command of that facility. Do not let anyone move that patient. Help is on the way." The line went dead. Eli lowered the phone. She continued to hold pressure on the man's artery, her body a rigid statue of focused intent. The beeping of the monitor was a steady rhythm now, a testament to the life she had pulled back from the brink. Finch had finally found his voice. "What was that? Who were you talking to? I am in charge here, and I am ordering you to step away from my patient." He pointed a trembling finger at her. "Security! I want this woman arrested for assaulting a patient and interfering with a physician." Two hospital security guards, burly men in ill-fitting uniforms, had arrived at the edge of the trauma bay, drawn by the shouting. They looked uncertain, glancing from the furious doctor to the calm, blood-spattered nurse and the miraculously alive patient between them. Before they could take a step, the main doors of the ER slid open with a force that made them rattle in their frames. It wasn't more paramedics. It wasn't hospital administration. 4 men in identical black suits with earpieces and the coiled cords of hidden microphones stepped inside. They moved with a synchronized, predatory silence that instantly silenced the entire floor. Their eyes, cold and analytical, swept the room, assessing, prioritizing, and dismissing threats. They were not police. They were something else entirely. Their presence was a wall of absolute, unquestionable authority. The lead agent, a man with a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite, strode directly to the central nursing station where Dr. Finch was standing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm Special Agent Thorne, Department of Defense," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble. This wing of the hospital is now under federal jurisdiction. You and your staff will evacuate this area immediately." He didn't flash a badge. The 3 other silent agents flanking him were his badge. Finch's face, already flushed with anger, turned a shade of crimson. "I am Dr. Alistair Finch, the Chief of Emergency Medicine," he blustered, puffing out his chest. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is my department, and I will not be ordered around by some government thug. Who the hell do you think you are?" The agent, Thorne, didn't even blink. His expression was one of profound, weary patience. The look of a man who had dealt with self-important obstacles his entire career. "We are the security detail for a 4-star general who is currently 10 minutes out and in a very bad mood. And we are operating under his direct command. Now, for the last time, Doctor, you and your staff will clear this area." He turned to his team. "Lock it down. Main entrance, service corridors, elevators. Nothing moves in or out without my say-so. Get a secure comms link established with the general's transport." He then turned back and surveyed the scene in Trauma Bay 1. The blood, the discarded equipment, the stunned medical team. "Who is in charge of the patient?" Finch, desperate to reassert his shattered authority, stepped forward again. "I am. It's my—" He was cut off. The agent's eyes had moved past him, past the residents, and had landed on Eli. He saw her, still holding pressure, her arm covered in blood, the patient's heart rate steady on the monitor behind her. His professional mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition, of awe. "Ma'am," he said, the single word imbued with a level of deep, ingrained respect that sent a shockwave through the room. He raised his hand to his wrist communicator. "Sir, this is Sentinel-1. We have eyes on the asset. Master Sergeant Vance is on site and has secured Nighthawk. Situation is stable and under her control." Master Sergeant Vance. The words echoed in the sudden, absolute silence of the emergency room. Brenda, the charge nurse, dropped a chart. A resident's jaw literally hung open. They all stared at Eli, the quiet, mousy rookie nurse, as if seeing her for the first time. Master Sergeant? The title didn't compute. It was from another world, a world of command and combat and danger. Dr. Finch's face went from crimson to a pasty, sickly white. The blood seemed to drain from him, leaving behind a hollow mask of fear and confusion. He looked at Eli, at the blood on her scrubs, at the unyielding strength in her posture, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He didn't see a rookie nurse. He saw a soldier. 10 minutes later, the sound of a heavy military helicopter descending on the hospital's helipad vibrated through the building. The ER staff, now huddled at the far end of the hall behind a cordon of DoD agents, watched in stunned disbelief. The doors burst open again, and General Marcus Thorne strode in. He was in his late 50s, tall and lean, wearing a decorated Class A uniform that seemed to radiate power. His 4 stars glinted on his shoulders under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was flanked by 2 more agents and a military medical officer in combat fatigues. The air in the room became thin, charged with his presence. He was a human shield made of silence and authority. He didn't glance at the assembled doctors and nurses. He didn't acknowledge Dr. Finch, who seemed to shrink in his presence. His eyes, the color of chips of ice, scanned the room and locked immediately onto Eli. He walked directly to Trauma Bay 1, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the linoleum. He stopped just outside the curtain of chaos, his gaze taking in the patient, the stabilized monitors, and finally, Eli herself. "Master Sergeant Vance," he said, his voice a clipped, commanding baritone. "Report." Eli, still holding pressure, never broke eye contact. Without a hint of emotion, she delivered her report. It was not the language of a civilian nurse. It was the precise, acronym-laden dialect of a combat medic. "Sir, patient is Colonel Davies, I believe. Sustained 3 GSWs from what looks like small-caliber, high-velocity rounds. Primary injury is a transected right subclavian artery, causing a massive occult hemothorax. He coded on arrival due to hypovolemic shock. I bypassed the chest tube and established a direct subclavian line for massive transfusion protocol and am maintaining manual pressure on the proximal artery. He is currently stable, BP 100/60, heart rate 95. He needs immediate vascular surgery." "Sir?" General Thorne listened, his expression unreadable. He nodded once, a sharp, definitive gesture. "Excellent work, Eli," he said, a hint of warmth finally entering his voice. "As always." Then that warmth vanished. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, and fixed his gaze on Dr. Finch. The change was terrifying. The general's eyes became arctic cold, and the full weight of his 4-star command authority descended on the surgeon like a physical blow. "Doctor," Thorne began, his voice dangerously quiet, "let me see if I understand the situation. You have a patient in your emergency room, a senior military officer, with gunshot wounds from a weapon system that is currently classified, the victim of an attempted assassination on United States soil. And your first instinct was to let him die. And your second was to have the one person in a 100-mile radius who could save his life arrested." Finch flinched as if he'd been struck. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. He was drowning in the general's cold fury. Thorne took a step closer. "This man," he said, gesturing with his chin toward the patient, "is Colonel Robert Davies. He is my Chief of Intelligence for the Advanced Research Projects Division. For the last 6 months, he has been leading a counter-espionage investigation into a leak. A very profitable leak. One involving proprietary medical technology developed with DoD funding, being sold to hostile foreign actors." Finch began to sweat profusely. Beads of moisture broke out on his forehead and upper lip. He shook his head, a pathetic, jerky motion. I don't know anything about that. I'm a doctor." "Oh, I think you do," Thorne continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a venomous whisper. "Colonel Davies's final encrypted data burst, sent seconds before he was ambushed, identified his primary target. He was closing in. The target was described as a highly respected, charismatic surgeon. A man with a 7-figure gambling debt owed to some very unsavory people. A man who launders the money he gets for selling secrets through a private cash-only clinic that performs so-called experimental procedures for wealthy foreign nationals." The general paused, letting the words hang in the sterile air. He looked Finch up and down, from his perfect silver hair to his absurdly expensive shoes. "Does any of that sound familiar to you, Dr. Finch?" It was as if Finch's strings had been cut. The arrogant, untouchable facade he had worn his entire life didn't just crack. It disintegrated into dust. His shoulders slumped. His face went slack with terror. The color drained away completely, leaving a waxy, gray sheen. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. No, it's a mistake," he stammered, his voice the reedy plea of a condemned man. "My intelligence officers do not make mistakes," Thorne stated, the words hitting like stones. He gave a subtle nod to the DoD agent standing nearby. "Agent Thorne, take this traitor into custody. I want him read his rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for treason and espionage. He is now the property of the Department of Defense." Two of the silent, black-suited men moved in. They didn't use handcuffs. They simply flanked Finch, each placing a firm hand on his arm. The surgeon offered no resistance. He was utterly broken. As they led him away, he passed the assembled ER staff, his former courtiers. He couldn't meet their eyes. They stared back, their faces a mixture of horror, disgust, and dawning, sickening understanding. The God King of the ER was a common criminal, a traitor. The other nurses and doctors looked from the pathetic figure of Finch to the quiet, blood-stained form of Eli. They remembered their snickers, their dismissal of her, their cowardly silence when Finch had humiliated her. The shame was a palpable thing in the hallway. They hadn't just misjudged a rookie. They had mocked a warrior, a hero, while fawning over a villain. They were an underground railroad of courage, and they had failed their first passenger. Meanwhile, the general's military medical team had swarmed the trauma bay with their own equipment. It was a mobile surgical suite, compact and ruthlessly efficient. They worked around Eli, seamlessly integrating with her, their movements practiced and sure. "We're ready for transfer, ma'am," the military doctor, a major, said to Eli. "You can release pressure." Eli coordinated with him, and on his count, she released the brutal pressure she had been holding for nearly half an hour. Her arm screamed in protest, numb and trembling. The major's team immediately clamped the artery. The patient remained stable. The dam had been replaced by a wall. General Thorne watched the process, then turned his full attention back to Eli. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the dried blood on her arms, the deep, abiding competence that radiated from her like heat. "Colonel Davies is my friend, Eli, not just my best officer. You saved his life." He sighed, a rare display of emotion. "And in doing so, you just single-handedly dismantled an espionage ring that has been bleeding my department dry for 2 years. All because you noticed a faint wheeze in an old man's lungs and refused to be silenced." He gestured around the ER, at the blinking lights and the lingering smell of fear and disinfectant. "I told you this world would bore you. I told you trading a flight suit for scrubs was a mistake." Eli finally allowed herself a small, weary smile. She flexed her numb fingers, trying to work the feeling back into them. "The benefits package was better, sir." The general actually chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. "Not for long." He became serious again. "I'm not asking you, Eli. I'm recruiting you. I'm building a new unit. It's been on the books for months, but I haven't been able to find the right person to lead it. A QRF, a quick reaction force, but for medical intelligence. A small, elite team that can deploy globally, assess and handle situations just like this one. Part medicine, part espionage, part combat triage. It needs a commander, someone with your unique skill set. Someone who knows what a subclavian bleed looks like and also knows how to use an encrypted sat phone. Someone who can command the respect of operators and surgeons alike." He held her gaze. "The rank is major. The pay is substantially better than what this place gives you. And I can personally guarantee that no one ever again will call you sweetheart unless they want to spend the rest of their career swabbing latrines in Antarctica." Eli looked around the emergency room. She saw Brenda, the charge nurse, whose face was a portrait of deep, profound regret. She saw the young resident who had blindly obeyed her command, now staring at her with unabashed hero worship. She saw the ghost of Dr. Finch, a monument to the petty corruption and ego that she had fought so hard to leave behind in her old life, only to find it here, wearing a different uniform. This place was a cage of its own, just with softer bars. She looked back at General Thorne, at the unwavering confidence in his eyes. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a way back home, to a world where competence was the only currency that mattered, where she didn't have to hide who she was. The exhaustion was still there, a heavy blanket over her shoulders, but underneath it, something else was stirring, a feeling she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Purpose. She straightened her back, the simple movement shedding the last vestiges of the meek, overlooked rookie nurse. In her place stood Master Sergeant Alara Vance of the United States Air Force Pararescue. "When do I start, General?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. General Thorne's stern face broke into a wide, genuine smile. "As soon as we get you cleaned up, Major." She walked out of the Metropolitan General ER an hour later, leaving her locker, her scrubs, and her old name behind. She didn't look back. Ahead of her, a black government sedan was waiting, its engine humming quietly. As she got in, she felt the quiet, exhausted relief of a soldier who had finally, after a long and pointless detour, received new orders. The war wasn't over, but she was back in the fight. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to support our channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It's your support that keeps these narratives coming. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Let me know in the comments below, and don't go anywhere, because the next story is loaded up and ready to play for you right now.